the Radio Forest Podcast.
Kasim, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Forrest. It's good to talk to you.
Can I just say something right off the bat and get it out of the way? Bat Out of Hell. Holy shit. That thing is a monster. It's one of the best-selling albums of all time.
Yeah, when we did that record, there was no way that anyone could have guessed that it was going to become one of the best-selling records of all time. But, talk about a feather in your cap. There's only a few of us that are on that record. And, I don't want to get morbid or anything, but I will go to my grave thinking to myself, I was on one of the best-selling records of all time.
That's got to be such a good feeling. If I were to put myself in your shoes, I would love that because it's not like my name on the album on the cover. So I'm not in the airport stopped and talking about it and have to sign it and sign it and sign it. And I don't have to play every song every night. But yet I get the joy, like you said, of like, man, I'm on that record. And then the hardcore fans got to be all into it. That's got to be such a cool feeling.
It is. And I cherished the day that Todd called me and said, hey, I'm producing a record. You want to play bass on it? And I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And that started down a path that years and years and years I worked with Meat Loaf and Jim Steinman, who was one of the most brilliant songwriters in the history of music. Just been blessed to have been involved in that project.
Now, the Todd you mentioned, of course, is Todd Rundgren, and he's getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame here, I think at the end of October. And he's been pretty outspoken about not being a fan of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He says it's kind of a scam. He hasn't said too much lately because he said he doesn't want to rain on anybody's parade, and he knows the fans are excited. Two questions. What are your thoughts on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And also, has he shared anything with you like, oh, man, I got to do this and I don't want to? Or
I haven't spoken to him about it because Todd is of the mindset that this is how I feel. You can disagree with me or agree with me. It doesn't matter. It's not going to change my opinion. But I respect his opinion, and I respect the way that he feels about it. Personally, it's called the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and there are a lot of people in there that deserve to be in there. And it's not for me to say that someone or something doesn't deserve to be in there, but it's kind of questionable when there are artists that don't have anything to do with rock and roll that are and have been inducted over the years. It's like, really? So it becomes more like a business and a political organization, or musically political, than it does really what it's supposed to be, which is like the Baseball Hall of Fame, or the Basketball or Football Hall of Fame, where there's just specifically endemic figures to that particular organization. So if you look at rock and roll as an organization, it's like, does Madonna really rock and roll?
Jay-Z,
Whitney Houston, the
Biggie
rock and
Small,
roll artist. That's just to name a couple, but not disparaging anybody. I love everyone, but really, come on.
I think everybody in the rock and roll community has the same feeling that you just kind of described. If you're in, that's great. Kudos to you. You probably deserve it. Your fans are excited. But you get bands like Öyster Cult and Judas Priest and Iron Maiden that take forever to get in. And then you got hip-hop stars that go in immediately. Like, well, wait a minute. What about, why did it take so long for Bon Jovi or Todd Rundgren or Öyster Cult to go in? So I think everybody, if they called it the Music Hall of Fame, we'd have a different conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you. And by the way, Öyster Cult is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They absolutely should be.
And you played with them. Yeah, that's right, man. There's no argument that I would go, oh, that's a good point. There's no point why they're not in. They've got sales, they've got influence, they've got sold records, they've got decades of rock. And you've got a new record out now. Congratulations. Yes. Kasim 2021. You've got that Fast Car song on there. Tell me about this album because you play a lot of different instruments. What did you do on this album? How much of it is you? Clearly the bass, right?
Well, actually, I share the bass responsibilities along with Phil Thornalley, who is the producer on the record. Phil and I both we're both multi-instrumentalists, so it was like, I'm going to play bass on this. Okay, you play bass on this. I'll play guitar on it. Okay, I'm going to play guitar on this one. Don't worry about it. I'll play keyboards on this. And Phil also is a really good drummer, too. John Siegler, he was the original bass player in Utopia. He also plays bass on the first single called More Love. Fast Car is the second single from the record. It's a really in-your-face, aggressive rock and roll tune. And that's Prairie Prince on drums from the Tubes on that song. It's just a really, really cool record. Very, very proud of it.
So how did you decide who goes on what song? Were all these songs recorded at different times and different people in mind? Or was it like a classic session where you're like, I've booked a studio for 3 months, meet me here at this time? Because COVID has changed a lot of how people are doing albums and reaching out and getting guests and things like that.
Well, these days things are a little bit different, and they have been for a while. Over the past, I guess maybe 5 to 10 years, people make records file sharing. They'll start on a basic track, and maybe they'll have the drummer in a real studio and one other guy in a real studio, and they play along to a demo, and then the drums are recorded, and then you send that track around to different people and say, can you put your part on it, and then send us back the file. So that's the way that a lot of records are recorded today. Yes, there are certain records that are done with a full band in a studio, but I think that that's the exception and not the norm these days. So this record was done pretty much half and half. Some of it was done with me and Phil in the studio together, and some of it was done just sending files through emails and Dropbox folders to other musicians and saying, hey, throw a part on this. I'd really appreciate it if you could play on my record.
Now, I talked to a fantastic guitar player a little while ago that you would know, Ricky Byrd.
Yeah, Ricky and I worked together on Joan Jett's band for about, maybe 3 or 4 years. He's a brilliant musician. He's a great guy. I love working with Ricky Byrd, and I think he had a record out just a few months back.
Yeah, he did. And you guys, of course, are on that huge song, Hate Myself for Loving You. Now, I also talked to Desmond Child, who wrote that song, or at least he co-wrote it with Joan Jett, and he told me an awesome story, and I wanted to find out if you'd had any interaction with him on the record, or if he wrote behind the scenes and then turned it into Joan. Did you run into Desmond? Have you run into Desmond?
Well, funny enough, Desmond and I have known each other since the early 80s. I knew Desmond when he used to be in a band called Desmond Child and Rouge. It was Desmond and 2 female singers. They did the New York club scene, and it was an interesting act. And Desmond was a songwriter back then, determined to become successful. Yeah, he is like one of the most successful songwriters, right up there with Diane Warren and a bunch of other people. So Desmond and I have known each other for a very, very long time. When Joan said, I'm going to be working on a few songs with Desmond Child, I said, oh, that's great. I know Desmond. So they came in, and we recorded that song up in a studio in Woodstock. I kind of had a feeling that it was going to be a pretty good record at the time because it was just it was an easy song to record. And Joan was very, very proud of it. And Desmond was like, this is going to be a big record. It's going to be a big record for you, Joan. And sure enough, I think it was top 5 in the U.S.
It's Kasim Sulton from Utopia, Todd Rundgren, Meat Loaf, Joan Jett. He's toured with Öyster Cult, played with a ton of different artists. His brand new album, 2021, is out now with the new song Fast Car, and there's a video for that too. Kasim Sulton, a pleasure to talk to you today, man. Thanks for all the awesome stories.
Thank you, Forrest. I really appreciate you having me on the show. Thank you.